We have made it to the 2027 NBA Draft, really kickstarting what is going to be the most important offseason of the series as we look to pivot now in the post-Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler era. We went over a lot in the last episode, and in case you missed it, I'll leave a card at the top right of your screen, but we started things off with the NBA Finals in what was a really exciting playoff overall. The finals was not quite as climactic. The Spurs blew out the Pacers 4 times, sweeping them as Victor Wembanyama and Luka Doncic win their first title. We've had 9 different champions over the last 9 years. Parity in the NBA is at an all-time high. But with Luka and Wemby on the same team, got to imagine this would be the first of many. Seeing the Spurs dominate against Indiana really hurts because we know how close we were to beating San Antonio in the Western Conference Finals. We were a 15-point choked lead in the final 5 minutes of Game 7 away from going to the finals and probably beating the Pacers. It hurts when you're that close, especially considering we're never going to get a chance to run it back, but it feels like a change of the times in the NBA. Every team is now rebranded. We now have 2 expansion teams and a long list of retirements. I don't know why LeBron is here. He retired last season, but still a very long list of players, including Jimmy Butler and Stephen Curry, who are leaving our squad. What a career for both of these guys. We went into a little bit more detail in the last episode. It was fun to be able to use Steph Curry in the first 3 seasons of this series. He never really got worse as he got older, but now the focus is on building this roster without having one of the, at minimum, 10 best players in the NBA, and things are going to get a whole lot more challenging. Along with them, many former Warriors greats, including Kevin Durant, Draymond Green, and to a lesser extent, Harrison Barnes, all retired. And the roster looks quite a bit different. We've been preparing for life without Curry, but the foundation of our roster construction has been to compete with him. Now we've got to build without him. I think we're in a good spot, though. We've got good young talent. We do not have a first-round pick in this year's draft currently, but we've got some very valuable picks up the pipeline. Next year, an unprotected first-round pick from the Bulls, whose highest-rated player currently is Brandon Pajemski. Now, I would assume one of Kalu Uduga or Matas Buzelis will pass him with player progression, but they're probably not going to be that good next year, and that pick is unprotected. But it's not just that one. All the way back in Season 1, in the Moses Moody Adembona swap with the Sixers, we got a 2029 swap best pick between the Sixers and the Clippers. Both of those teams are probably not going to be very good in 2029. The Clippers' best player right now is Michael Porter Jr. Granted, they do have the 4th overall pick this year, but that's probably not going to be enough to push them over the edge. The Sixers, meanwhile, are still quite talented, but Joel Embiid will probably be traded in the next 10 minutes. Tyrese Maxey's future here seems unclear, and the Sixers are probably going to start a rebuild. It's sort of crazy we got that pick from them when the best player in that trade ended up being Adembona, who we also got. That trade ended up being a small one at the time, but a fleece in hindsight. So we are in an interesting spot here because I think our roster is still good enough to compete. We've got some good young players as trade assets. We have 2 very valuable picks. And because of that, if we want to go out and add a star this offseason to keep ourselves at the top of the Western Conference, we can. Joel Embiid is going to be certainly available. Tyrese Maxey may very well be as well. Embiid's a tough case, though, because he's 33 years old. He's clearly regressing, and he has a history of injury issues, which I imagine will not get better as he gets older. Maxey, meanwhile, a little bit more up in the air since he's 26. The Sixers can still theoretically build around him. As we look at some stars who are unlikely to be available, but for the right price, maybe the teams would consider, I'd throw Donovan Mitchell on that list. The Cavs were really bad this year, but they're also 1 season removed from making the finals. The Celtics have been mediocre over the last few years. They could theoretically tear it down and really try to build around Everest McLeon. Again, I still think it's unlikely they would trade one of Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown. I don't know if Anthony Davis counts as a star. He's 34 years old. He's not the same offensively, but I think he'll be available. I could see the Mavericks tearing things down with Kyrie Irving and then Trae Young. As we look at some guys who I think are more likely to be available, I would peek at Ja Morant in Memphis. He's on the last year of his deal. I could see them trying to transition into Miko Kapanen being the franchise player. Bam Adebayo only has 1 year left in Miami. The Heat have been kind of mediocre, and I could see them looking to move on from him. The Hornets were one of the worst teams in the league last year. LaMelo Ball only has 2 years left, and he probably is going to want out at some point. And then the big one, in my opinion, is Zion Williamson with the Pelicans. After we swept New Orleans in the first round of the playoffs this year, it really felt like to me that the Zion Williamson era for New Orleans is done. He has one more year left on his contract. I think there's pretty much a 0% chance he would re-sign. The one thing that the Pelicans were really hoping for with league expansion was for there to be 2 teams to go in the Western Conference, so they would be able to move out east. But that's not going to happen, so now they feel like they've got to rebuild. There's also free agency with Giannis Antetokounmpo and Nikola Jokic both holding player options that I expect them to decline. I imagine both of them will return to their current teams, but you got to imagine someone like Golden State would certainly throw those guys an offer. And then next year's class is a little bit weaker. I don't think Devin Booker and Jalen Brunson are going anywhere, so Morant, Zion, and Adebayo feel like the big 3. Going after Giannis or Jokic could be risky because I think both of them are showing signs of age. Giannis is coming off statistically one of his worst seasons. Now, granted, the Bucks had more good players around him, but his efficiency was the lowest it's been in a long time. Nikola Jokic's efficiency has also dropped in each of the last 5 seasons. Now, again, he is still a very good player, but both of these guys at 32 years old are showing some signs of aging, and I'm not entirely sure if they fit with our current core's timeline. Even though we wouldn't have to give up any assets for them, it would only be, well, money. So we actually have 2 drafts to go over today. The expansion draft as well with the Seattle Sonics and the Montreal Huskies, the NBA's 2 newest franchises. We figured Vegas would get a team with Seattle, but Montreal was able to land one instead. So we only have 7 players under team control this offseason, our 7 best players, and at first, I thought we would be able to protect everybody because, as you can see with the Wizards, they're able to protect up to 8 players. So I originally clicked on Onyeka Okongwu's here, but it says we would have to leave 1 player unprotected, which sucks because all of these guys are very valuable pieces to our team. They all have trade value, and they were all key rotation players for us in the playoffs. I think Brandon Ingram and Jonathan Kuminga are too good to let go. Salis, Stokes, and Loggins Burrow are our 3 best young players. And then between Okongwu and Bona, I think Adem Bona is better and he's younger. So of this group, I think, unfortunately, Onyeka Okongwu is the most expendable. Teams can only lose 1 player in the expansion draft, so it's pretty much a sure thing that Okongwu would get picked, especially considering he's probably going to be one of the best players in the expansion draft pool. So the Huskies and Sonics will begin. Zamir Logan with the Nets, probably the biggest surprise to be left unprotected, but the Nets have so many good young players. Okongwu ends up being the 3rd round pick of the Seattle Sonics, so as I expected, he ended up going off the board pretty early. Both teams kind of went for an older strategy, which surprised me a little bit. Former Warrior Ayo Dosunmu, unprotected by New Orleans. He will end up with the Montreal Huskies. Caleb Martin, another former Warrior, will go to the Seattle Sonics. So clearly both teams want to be competitive and respectable next year. Now the Huskies' 5 best players are all at least 32 years old. They've got a couple intriguing young pieces with Stone Autry, who was a lottery pick last year, Noah Clowney, and some younger guys down here. But I'm surprised by the strategy here. The Sonics went a little bit younger. They kind of went for an inside-out approach, focusing on guard play and bigs. Their 4 best players are centers and point guards. Again, I think Zamir Logan will be the premier player of this expansion draft, and Onyeka Okongwu should be one of the better players on this Sonics team next year. Certainly unfortunate that we lose out on him, though, and we will get nothing in return, while other teams got to do away with their bad contracts, like Fred VanVleet in Utah and Rudy Gobert in Minnesota. So the one thing we haven't really talked about today is the draft itself, which is the biggest portion of today's video. But yes, we do have a draft. We went over the prospects in the last episode. The Utah Jazz won the draft lottery again. They will be picking at number 1 and number 3. I feel like it's a 3-player draft at the top with Norwood Nobles from Minnesota, Cam McKnight from Illinois, and Jabari Ogabari from Purdue. It seems like those guys are going to be the top 3 picks in some order. And now the Jazz have to be strategic with how they use the number 1 pick because they get to pick at number 3. They get 2 of those guys on their team. So it's about trying to figure out who they think the Wizards will not choose at number 2. On one hand, the Jazz probably don't need to draft 2 wings. You would think Jabari Ogabari would be one of the 3 that they would look for. But I'm not so sure about that considering how much depth the Wizards have in terms of their bigs. Looking at these mock drafts, we had the 54th overall pick in the second round. That's currently our only draft pick as of right now, but again, given the changes to our team with Steph and Jimmy Butler retiring, you imagine we're going to go with a younger approach. So because of that, given the right opportunity, we may look to move up into the first round of the draft, but we don't want to necessarily force a move just to make one. But rather, we've got to find the right fit. We've got to find the right player if we think they can contribute early on, or if they have a really high ceiling for us down the line with a very developable skill set. But again, looking at the Jazz at number 1, they don't necessarily have to pick Ogabari with that top spot because the Wizards drafted, I kid you not, 5 centers in last year's draft, including Noah Longley, number 3 overall. Not to mention, they have Alex Sarr as well. The Jazz also have 3 other first-round picks this year. They pick at 1, 3, 13, 23, and 24. But it really doesn't make sense for the Jazz to keep all 5 of those picks. They have so many young former first-rounders on their roster, but these guys don't know how to win games. The Jazz have had the worst record in the NBA all 3 seasons of this series. They've got to become a serious basketball team and acquire some veterans to help these young guys out. Obviously, they're going to keep number 1 and number 3. But why use the other 3 first-round picks when you're already developing a lot of prospects already? Why not get some veterans who can help this team out and stop playing unserious basketball? Martin Sifa, the former number 1 pick, is a good building block. They've got some other intriguing young players, but they've got to get some good fits. So we've got a 3-team deal here with Cleveland and Denver, 2 teams looking to shake up the deck a little bit. And I think Jared Allen and Aaron Gordon are perfect fits for the Jazz. Allen's a good rim protector. He's a lob threat, and he's on a team-friendly contract. Gordon's a championship role player who's one of the more efficient guys on both ends of the floor. So the Cavs will get pick number 13. The Nuggets will get 23 and 24. While Sage Escamas will go to the Cavs, a 20-year-old point guard drafted in the second round last year. The Nuggets are going to get a little extra as well. So I think that benefits all parties. If the Jazz add 2 good veterans, their roster isn't horrible, while the Cavs and Nuggets get younger. Oklahoma City is another team who, after the lottery, I felt like they're not going to keep their picks, number 15 and number 16. And I think Denny Avdia in Portland could be the perfect fit for their roster. They don't need star power, but they need another consistent wing. Avdia has been very underrated with the Blazers, who don't really need him. They've drafted a ton of young talent over the last few years, and he's been overshadowed. The Thunder will get off of the Lou Dort contract by sending him to the Sonics, along with the 29th and 32nd overall picks. So the Sonics, along with the Huskies, are both going to be good teams to have in 3-team deals because they can absorb salaries and take on draft picks for those contracts. Seattle now has 3 first-round picks this year. Portland now has 3 in the lottery, 11, 15, and 16, and the Thunder add the perfect piece with Denny Avdia. Oklahoma City's stash of first-rounders is dead, although this Mavericks pick will be quite valuable, I think, next year. But they do have a big stash of second-rounders. 3 this year, 4 in 2028, 5 in 2029, and then 2 in 2030. I could see them exchanging some of those second-rounders for a projected late first-rounder. Let's now look at some of these big trades. We've got some stars on the move. Joel Embiid is headed to the Brooklyn Nets. It was really hard to find a suitor for Joel Embiid, which is going to push his value down. But the Sixers are still getting 4 first-round picks. Granted, none of the picks individually are that valuable. Nick Claxton will also go to the 76ers, while Colin Sexton is headed to the Nuggets. I think this makes sense for Brooklyn. They were a game away from the finals last year. Of course, they want to show Devin Booker that they're focused on building around him. They have plenty of young pieces as is, but maybe Joel Embiid can be what they're missing, and a change of scenery could do him well. Nick Claxton isn't really needed anymore since they'll be getting Joel Embiid. And even though both the Nets and Nuggets will be trading away 2 first-rounders, none of them are that valuable. Those Nets picks should not be great because the team will be good. And the 2 first-rounders the Nuggets traded, they just got moments ago from Utah. So Denver swaps Aaron Gordon for Colin Sexton, who in my opinion is younger and better. Let's now talk about the guys who I think we could actually consider going after. LaMelo Ball, Ja Morant, Zion Williamson, and Bam Adebayo. These are the 4 guys I've got my eye on for the Warriors. I thought about Joel Embiid, but he doesn't fit our timeline. He's older, he's regressing, and he has injury concerns. These guys are not old. These guys are in the prime of their careers, and I think would fit our timeline well. LaMelo will be the hardest to get because he's the best player of the group, he's the youngest player of the group, and he's the only one who's not on an expiring contract. So presumably, we would probably have to start the offer with both the Bulls pick and the Clippers-Sixers pick swap, two of the most valuable picks in the league. I know they only combined for 3.5 stars, but they are two of the more valuable picks in the NBA. We're going to decimate ourselves with draft picks, and the Hornets would probably want two of our young guys, say Kajai Stokes and Roman Loggins-Burrell. That just feels like too much for me. I would not be willing to mortgage our entire future for LaMelo Ball. The only young piece left in terms of draft picks or players would be Antoine Saliz. It's just not something I'm willing to do at this point in time. So the Hornets are going to pivot. They would get another deal, which I love for both teams. LaMelo is going to the Blazers in a package that is centered around Scoot Henderson to Charlotte. Portland is right on the verge of being a really good team. They made some strides last year. They have so much young talent. The Ball brothers get to be reunited for what it's worth. So Portland's going to be giving up 3 first-round picks, including 2 this year, but they only have to give up 1 first after this season. Scoot Henderson is the main attraction here for Charlotte. Henderson signed a 3-year extension coming into the season this year. He's coming off the best year of his career, and Charlotte is legitimately excited about him. They feel like he still has all-star upside. But for Portland, they want to contend now, and I think they've got the pieces to do it. So we've got a deal. Portland now catapults themselves, in my opinion, to be one of the 3 or 4 best teams in the West. Sila Novikov, as a rookie, made the All-Star team, the first since Blake Griffin, and he missed a year before his rookie season. Bardo Campolo is a great young piece. I think with a big third-year leap, he could be an all-star next year. Now you add LaMelo Ball. You have Donovan Clingan. Shaedon Sharpe they're going to try to bring back. I love that core in Portland. They are going to be scary. What about the other guys, though? Bam Adebayo, Ja Morant, Zion Williamson. We're going to continue to explore trades for all 3 of these guys, but for now, these teams will all stand pat. Bam, Ja, and Zion may get moved, Zion in particular, but it won't be today. I don't want to give up too much for these guys because they're all expiring, and none of them are getting younger. Bam's 29, Zion's 27, Ja's going to be 28 before the season starts, so we have to be smart about this. We've got 2 more trades before the draft. Both involve New Orleans. So Darius Garland is going to the Lakers. They need a guard to pair with Shavonte Fitzgerald in the backcourt. They'll be trading Kristaps Porzingis to Minnesota to pair with or replace Karl Anthony Towns. And then the Wolves are trading a first and Jaden McDaniels to New Orleans. The Pelicans are trying to add some draft capital for Garland, and they're going to do the same with DeJounte Murray and Trey Murphy, who are going to Sacramento. Murray's coming off the most efficient season of his career. Trey Murphy is a really good 4th or 5th starter for a contender. And New Orleans is going to get a lot back, including a lottery pick from Phoenix, another future first-rounder. Amari Tate was a lottery pick last year. The Kings have one of the brightest futures in the league, and they want to make their roster better. The top of this team looks weird with Murray, Ayton, Lauri Markkanen, but I think this team is set up quite well. Dennis Gordon, I think, could be an all-star next year. He averaged over 20 a game, leading the Kings to the 6th seed. You've got Nova Coulson. You've got Caden Howard. They still have a first-rounder this year, and they still have pretty much all their future picks. As for New Orleans, they are beginning to sell the farm. 3 of their 5 starters, Garland, Murray, Murphy, all gone. Zion's probably next. They have 3 first-rounders this year, granted nothing next year. I imagine they would be looking for 2028 picks for Zion. So we have to remember that those guys are all available for us via trade. Jokic and Giannis are all available for us via free agency. So we've got choices in terms of how we want to manage things through the rest of the offseason. And I'm curious to see if you guys think we should trade for one of those guys, if we should sign one of the big fish, or if we should stand pat with our young core, because I think we've got a good thing going with these players and these picks. We've been doing a lot of rambling for the last 20 minutes. Let's get this show on the road. We had a lot of picks moved just now, none in the top 10, but 5 picks between 11 and 16 exchanging hands in the last 15 minutes. One more order of business. For those of you who would like to download the draft class, this is how you do it, same as it's been in the past. In 2K share scenarios, you will type in my PSN. You can download any of the 3 off seasons. Obviously, this is off season year number 3. And it'll take you to the start of the NBA Finals, basically where we began in the last episode. Looks like the Spurs win again here. They sweep Indiana once more. You can override Steph Curry's retirement if you want. You can take over any team currently in the league, try to build the Warriors post Steph Curry, take over another team in this save file, or you can save the draft class and put it into one of your pre-existing save files that you already have. All right, let's get this show on the road. Once and for all, the 2027 NBA Draft is now on the clock. The Utah Jazz are up. Who will they select number 1? Again, they're going to be strategic here, trying to figure out who the Wizards don't want at number 2. Washington has been linked to Illinois' Cam McKnight. He's been the choice for them in all 3 mock drafts. So presumably it'll be him, Ogabari, and Nobles in the top 3. It's just a matter of the order. With the first pick, the Utah Jazz select Samuel Queen from the University of Florida. Welcome to the draft, everybody! A shocker! The Jazz are no strangers to draft night surprises. 2 years ago, they drafted Martin Sifa number 1 overall, a pick no one saw coming, and this one was probably even less predictable. So why are the Jazz doing a bombshell and drafting Queen number 1 overall? They're not afraid to ruffle some feathers, maybe one of the biggest reasons why they have finished with the worst record 3 years in a row. But I actually don't think this will be that bad of a selection because Queen comes in as a 78 overall. He is the modern prototype for an NBA guard, can finish around the rim at a high level, can shoot the 3 ball better than his percentages indicated at Florida. He's arguably the best passer in the draft, 5.9 assists per game this year at Florida, 16.5 points per game on good shooting splits as well. He has such a fascinating story. A year ago after his freshman year, he was not on NBA draft radars. Here is a sophomore, first-team All-American, best guard in the country, number 1 pick to the Utah Jazz. With the second pick, the Washington Wizards select Cam McKnight from Illinois. A little more chalky. I think this is who they would have picked number 1 overall. McKnight was the apple of their eye all along, and they didn't exactly do a good job of hiding it. 19.5 points per game, 35% from 3. When you are drafting a potential franchise player, you want someone who can contribute to winning. Well, Cam McKnight was the best player on an Illinois team who made it all the way to the national championship. Guy knows how to win games, can score from all 3 levels, really good defender, very solid athlete. The Wizards have a lot of young talent. They've got to start winning some games, and I think Cam McKnight will go a long way in this Wizards team becoming good in the near future. Nonetheless, 4 years in a row with a top 5 pick, they've got to get it together. So the Jazz were given an offer here at number 3 for Evan Mobley from Cleveland. A little ironic because the Cavs originally owned this pick. They traded it in the Donovan Mitchell trade. I don't think that makes sense for Cleveland, though, as the Jazz pick Norwood Nobles out of Minnesota. A little bit more to be expected here. Nobles went into the season as the projected number 1 pick. Fell a little bit, but it's not necessarily because of his play. 17 points, 9.3 rebounds per game, 52% from the field. He ends up as the highest rated prospect in the entire draft class as an 81 overall, and in my opinion, becomes the best long-term piece on this Utah Jazz roster. I imagine many of you, after seeing them picking Queen number 1, are thinking, what are the Jazz doing? What are they cooking? The kitchen is being burnt down. But I actually like what they've got going here. They felt like they didn't need a big man because they just traded for Jared Allen. And now they've got a group of guys who fit together. Martin Sifa, Samuel Queen, and Norwood Nobles is the long-term big 3. Karspas Balcevicius and Yontair Kingsley were top 10 picks last year. Jared Allen, Aaron Gordon, Keegan Murray, all good veterans. And the jury's still out on guys like Isaiah Collier and Cody Williams. So to be completely honest, I don't think the Jazz managed this poorly, and I think Samuel Queen was underrated throughout the process and will finish, at minimum, as one of the 5 best players in this draft. Dallas Carter goes number 4 out of Kansas to the Clippers. I would have assumed with Jabari Ogabari, who I thought was going to go number 1, slipping out at the top 3, the Clippers would run the card up. They don't, ultimately opting with Dallas Carter, and I don't think this is a bad pick at all. I think this is who many expected to be the 4th overall pick going into the night. Now, granted, we had some surprises above number 4, but the Clippers clearly fell in love with this guy. He was the apple of their eye. He was the player they wanted all along. One of the best scorers in the country for the Jayhawks, averaged 18.3 points per game. He can win off the ball. He can win on the ball. Playmaker for himself and others. Good defender as well. I think he can be the franchise player for the Clippers, but hopefully not too soon, since we had their swap best pick in 2 years. Now we've got the Huskies and the Sonics, their first ever picks. This will be very interesting as the Montreal Huskies select Amari Cambridge out of Florida State. This pick might be even more surprising than Samuel Queen, number 1 to me. Cambridge was a guy I thought would go a little bit after the lottery, more like pick 20 or so. Cambridge had a disappointing freshman year at Florida State, 9.5 points per game on just 43% shooting from the field and 30% from 3. But I guess the Huskies were enamored with the upside he showed as a high school prospect and the inconsistent flashes as a freshman with the Seminoles. He was not as good as many of the other guys who are going to go in the top 10, but the Huskies clearly believe in the upside. He's got an NBA-level body right away at 6'8", 220, and they believe he has the highest ceiling on the board. So that is our top 5. Not really as we expected. Jabari Ogabari out of Purdue still on the board. And as I think about it, I can kind of see why. A slightly physically limited center who doesn't really have an outside game. He's a little inconsistent defensively, but with a 7'10" wingspan, he has the tools to be a great rim protector. And his fall will last at least one more pick. Desante Crawford out of UConn to the Sonics at number 6. Seattle, like their expansion counterpart, making a surprise pick in my opinion. But I think this one is a little bit better than Cambridge. I don't mind this pick at all for Seattle. Crawford was the top scorer of this year's freshman class, 20.2 points per game on 46% shooting from the field, 39% from 3, and going on a Sonics team who obviously doesn't have a lot of talent, he's not going to have to share the ball. I would expect he leads the rookie class in scoring this year as well. The Hornets at number 7 select Jabari Ogabari out of Purdue. Finally, he is off the board. One of the more surprising falls in recent memory. We thought he was going to go number 1, and at the very least a lock to go in the top 3 or at worst 4 picks. But he falls to 7. I think there are some question marks with his game. He doesn't really provide anything on the outside offensively, doesn't have much of the jumper. I don't think he has the quickness to defend the perimeter. I don't think he's overly strong at his size, although at 19 years old he can develop that. He's a little inconsistent defensively, but with a 7'10" wingspan, he has the tools to be a great defender, and I think he can be a really good lob threat early on. I think he might have a slightly disappointing rookie season, but given his physical tools, he could be an intriguing player down the line. The Phoenix Suns at number 8 select Shaquille Hunter out of Houston, so the other center goes off the board to Phoenix, who might have a worse future than anybody in the league currently, and in my opinion, they're doing the right thing here by picking the best player on the board. Shaquille Hunter is another guy who is not really on draft radars coming into the year, a fringe top 100 recruit in last year's high school class. He ended up being the best player on a Houston team who won the national championship, scoring 22 points in the championship over Illinois, winning the Final Four MVP, 3-level scorer. He does have the outside shot. I think he's better defensively than Ogabari, and I think he'll be the better player as a rookie. Now, the difference is he doesn't have a 7'10" wingspan. He's a better overall athlete, but his arms are 7 inches shorter. At number 9, another proposed trade. I don't know why the Hawks would trade this pick for 2 role players. They're going to choose Stuart Jacobs out of Creighton here. An interesting choice in my opinion. Now keep in mind, after the Hawks pick at number 10, they will have 8 lottery picks in the last 3 seasons since this series started. So they're just focused on adding as much talent as possible. I'm fascinated to see his fit with J.D. Little, who they drafted last year, in the backcourt. Both guys play point guard. Both guys primarily play on the ball. And I don't see a world where J.D. Little comes off the ball. So they're going to need to train Stuart Jacobs to be a wing. I think he's got the size to do it. I wish he was a better shooter, only 32% from 3. But if you can teach him to play off the ball a little bit, I think he could fit with their young core quite well. And clearly the Hawks believe that he's got more versatility than what was let on at Purdue with having a high usage rate this year as a freshman with the Blue Jays. And then at number 10, Atlanta picks Princely Kenson out of Duke. For a team who has multiple guys who demand the ball, grabbing someone who might be the best pure off-ball offensive player in this draft makes a ton of sense. Kenson has a knockdown shot, 40% from 3 as a freshman. I think teams are overlooking him. He's a 79 overall. I think the ceiling is a little bit limited because he doesn't demand the ball offensively, but I think he's the perfect number 2 or number 3 scorer. The best shooter of this year's freshman class from beyond the arc. He can make plays when he occasionally has the ball. He's not a great defensive player. He's got to improve there, but I think he fits on this Hawks team really well because they have a lot of guys who command the ball. So that's now 8 lottery picks in the last 3 years, not even counting Zachary Rizache, number 1 overall in 2024. But unlike the Jazz and the Wizards, I think Atlanta is starting to learn how to win games with each other. They competed for a play-in spot this year. I could see them making the playoffs next year. So the top 10 picks are through. Kind of the guys we did expect to go in the top 10. Per NBA.com's mock draft, they got 9 of the top 10 players right. It's just that the order that these guys went in was completely unpredictable, starting at number 1. Let's move forward, though. The Hornets, who had 3 of the next, I think, 5 or 6 first-rounders, they picked Shefo Safiyanu from Florida State, a guy who we really started to follow later in the pre-draft process. He might be the most unique player in this class because he is a 23-year-old, fifth-year senior who has a career average of 5.5 points per game in a very large sample size, having played over 170 games in his career with the Seminoles. This year, he only averaged 9.8 points a night as a 23-year-old. So why are the Hornets doing this? They feel like he's the perfect complement for the guys they already have. He's a phenomenal playmaker. He doesn't shoot the ball a lot, but he's really efficient. He made nearly 66% of his 2-point shots this year, and at 6'8", 240, he can guard the 1 through the 5. He's a freak athlete who can guard smaller players on the perimeter, and I think he's going to do a good job of defending bigs early on. He's got grown man strength. He's not 19 years old. He's going to be 24 early in his rookie year, and sure, that limits his upside. He is a full year and 3 months younger than his new teammate Scoot Henderson, who's about to begin his 5th NBA season. But I like the pick for the Hornets. He fits their team really well. With the 12th pick, the Bulls select Cyrus Mdint from Memphis. I think he is one of the 5 or 6 highest ceilings in this draft at minimum. He's newer to the game of basketball, but he has come along very quickly. He is a great eye as a passer and playmaker. Now, he still makes a lot of mistakes. He turns the ball over at a pretty high rate, but his feel for the game at someone who is very new to the game is really impressive. He can also shoot the ball at a pretty high level. He's not a good defender right now, but he's got the tools to get there. I don't think he's going to be an overly impactful rookie. I would say year 3, year 4 is when you're hopefully going to start to really see the value paying off. This probably helps our Bulls pick next year, but Chicago isn't really focused about that. They're playing the long game, and they're drafting someone who has the potential to be an all-star down the line. Jaden Carter goes number 13 to the Cleveland Cavaliers. They're looking to get younger, add some talent on the wing after what was a very disappointing season. They got this pick earlier today from Utah for Jared Allen. Carter was one of the top recruits in this year's class from Montverde Academy. He was inconsistent as a freshman at UCLA, 11.7 points per game, 43% from the field, 28% from deep, up and down defensively. But at 6'8", 210, he's a good athlete. He has shown shooting upside, and I think he can be a good defensive player down the road. The Pelicans on the board at number 14. They were offered a trade here, another trade that I decided to pass on because OG Anunoby has one of the worst contracts in the NBA. I don't know why New Orleans would do that. As they select Janai Schofield from Texas A&M. When we talked about Schofield in the draft preview, he was slated to go in the 2nd round. I don't know why. I always saw him as a first-round caliber prospect. And I don't think this is a reach at all for the Pelicans. 13.5 points per game, 4.1 assists, 38% from deep. He's a big guard. He comes in at 6'7". Really impressive size for someone who can command the offense as the 1, but he can play off the ball on the wings as well. We're still technically in the lottery. Now the lottery is 16 picks, but we're going to start to move a little faster now as Kareem Hadidi goes to the Hornets. They pick at number 15 and 17, their 3rd and 4th picks of the night. Hadidi's a role player with good athleticism, but I think he's a little bit of a tweener. I don't think he has the quickness to be a wing. I don't think he has the size and strength to be a big, but clearly the Hornets think he can develop into his body a little bit more, and he's got time. He's only 19 years old. The Trailblazers at number 16 select Elijah Harris out of LSU. Had an inefficient season scoring the ball as a freshman, but the kid can score the ball. He had a strong 13.4 points per game, granted on just 26% from deep. He's a solid vertical athlete, though, and could be an intriguing developmental piece, especially if they lose Shaedon Sharpe in free agency. They've got a lot of guys to pay in the future, and I would understand if Sharpe is not one of their top priorities. Alex Wisham goes to the Hornets here at number 17. He only played 10 games this year for St. Louis, but at 7'4", with his arm length, it was hard to see him going out of the 1st round. Much like his father, Ashton, Alex Wisham is a very impressive rim protector. I think he's a little bit more athletic than his dad was, hence why he goes earlier. Carter Smith to Boston at number 18. He had a very impressive season with the Red Raiders, 45% from 3. He's not going to command the ball, and I think he's a guy who can really help this team space the floor, give them some good bench scoring, which is what they really need. The Pelicans at number 19 pick Zolio Galvez out of Gonzaga. He reminds me so much of Trey Murphy. They just traded away Trey Murphy, so this fit makes a lot of sense. 6'8", he's skinny, but he's 19. He can grow into his body. Good three-point shooter. I think he's got the tools to get better defensively, although he's not there yet. The Grizzlies at 20 select Riley Forloin out of Duke. I thought he was going to go in the lottery, so the Grizzlies take advantage, landing him at number 20. This is another guy, though, who's a tweener. At 6'5", nearly 220, I think he's slower than most guards. He certainly doesn't have the height of most wings, but I think his feel for the game will really help him out at the next level. He's not a great scorer, only averaged 9.4 points per game this year at Duke, but he's one of the better playmakers in this class. 4.2 assists per game, can play with and without the ball in his hands. So now we've made it through the top 20 picks, and we still have not made a move yet, but I am considering it. There are some prospects I like who I thought would have been off the board by now. The problem is we don't have a lot of flexibility in terms of making a trade now that we're in the 20s because, well, I'm not going to trade any of these four players. Ingram, Kuminga, Loggins, Burrell, Stokes. Why would I trade one of them for a late first? I don't want to trade any of our future firsts either. So really, the only two picks we can trade is number 22 in the second round and the Mavericks second rounder next year. That's probably not enough for a late first rounder. So for now, we're going to hang tight. Unfortunately, one of the guys I liked was Jalen Carrington. He goes with the very next pick to the Magic. I didn't think he would last much longer. Carrington was a five-star recruit coming into the year, and while he was disappointing per expectations, he was really good as a role player, helping lead Houston to the national title. He's a freak athlete at his size, 6'7", 245, and he made winning plays for them down the stretch. Only scored 4 points in the championship, but was great defensively. Samuel Ojabo goes number 22 to the Kings, another guy I liked and was hoping to land. He was very inconsistent this year at Michigan, 10.1 points per game on just 25% shooting from three. But he is a very unique body type, 6'6", 250. He's built like an NFL edge rusher. He has elite athleticism, and I like his versatility defensively. The Sixers with back-to-back picks start with Hamadi Adebawale, the center from USC, looking to replace Joel Embiid, who was traded earlier today to the Brooklyn Nets. Adebawale is another guy who I think has a good feel for the game. He's improving defensively. He's a solid athlete. I don't know how much he's going to play early on. The Sixers have Nick Claxton and Robert Williams ahead of him, but I think he could be quite solid. And then at 24, Lazar Klajancic from Serbia going to the Sixers. He's kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. He doesn't really have any weaknesses, but there's not one area of his game that's really impressive. I don't think he's ever going to be a great player, but ideally a complimentary role player. You may notice this is technically the first international player off the board, or I believe the first player who did not play college basketball. There were some international players picked ahead of him, but more international guys are going the college route because of NIL. I tried to get one of these Rocket picks here at number 25. It doesn't look like it's going to happen, so we're going to have to hang tight at least for now. Edouard Paquet from France goes to the Rockets. He was not one of my targets, but it's not because I don't think he's a good prospect. He reminds me a lot of another French prospect, Antoine Salis. I think he's a little bit bigger at 6'8". I think he's a little bit worse as an all-around scorer, though. But I think there are some similarities in their games. He can play on the ball and off the ball as a bigger guard. At number 26, Mustafis Imukik from Creighton goes to the Pistons. This young man can put the ball in the bucket, 13.6 points per game, shot the three ball well for someone who is 6'9", and I think he could give the Pistons some nice bench scoring next year. The Pacers at number 27, who made the NBA Finals this past season, will not be keeping the pick. They are trading it to the Cleveland Cavaliers. The Pacers didn't really like anybody on the board, and they want to add some veterans. Tyrese Halliburton was awesome for the most part in the finals, but many of their other guys, like Jarris Walker, Keyshawn George, they really struggled. They need more vets, so they'll be getting Malcolm Brogdon and CJ McCollum, while the Cavs pick Ben Hernandez, the 7-footer from Spain. Hernandez should be a good rim protector pretty early on. His offensive game is really raw, but the Cavs hope that they can develop him. And here at the end of the first round, it's really just about taking flyers and strong risks that you hope will pay off. The Cavs are able to get off of two pretty big contracts, and they add a young piece at center. Jesus Montero, another Spanish-born big man, goes here to the Rockets, a late riser throughout the pre-draft process, and for good reason. 77 overall. Now, looking at these grades, I'm a little surprised he's that high. But he can shoot the ball a little bit from deep. He's got a good feel as a playmaker. Not a great defender, though. He's going to have to improve in that regard. The Sonics have two of the last picks of the first round, but they are trading one of them to Charlotte for Jalen Williams. This might look like a weird trade for Seattle, but Jalen Williams is a vibes guy. He's a culture guy. Teammates love him, and the Sonics want guys like that in the locker room. The Hornets, meanwhile, will now have 5 first-rounders as they trade up for Ezi Obiampo from North Carolina. This was the guy I wanted to trade up for. I thought he should have gone like pick 15 or so, and I don't really know how he fell this far. 76 overall, disappointing freshman year at UNC, 10.5 points per game, 7 rebounds, but he, I think, has a really high ceiling. The Hornets got themselves a young core with Brandon Miller, Scoot Henderson, Philip Leopold, Jabari Ogabari, Sefu Shafiyanu, Izzy Obiambo. They have a really fun team. I'm excited to play against them next year. Jackson Ryan at number 30 to the Clippers, only a 72 overall, but he's a fascinating player to me. He's a 6'6" point guard who averaged 16 points per game at Cal on good shooting splits, 40% from 3, and he's a freak athlete. Led the combine in vertical jump at 44 inches. I like that pick a lot for the Clippers. Tavion Powers to the Pelicans at number 31. Not a guy we really talked about a lot during the pre-draft process, but he's going to be one of the better value picks of the first round, a 76 overall off rip, one of the better playmakers in the draft. The Pelicans clearly focused on the backcourt as they start their rebuild, drafting Janai Schofield, drafting Tavion Powers, trading for Amari Tate. I like that group of youngsters. And then the Sonics at number 32 select Davide Mewis, his Syracuse teammate, couple of Orange players off the board to wrap up the first round, as that will conclude round 1 of the draft. Mewis will come in as a 73 overall, 6'10", 250, more of a big. I do think he has some solid versatility, though. He can guard the perimeter at a pretty high level, even though he's not the quickest. He's a very instinctive defensive player. Into the second round, some solid guys still on the board, potentially worth a flyer. I'm still very much exploring a trade-up with the 2 second-rounders we have left. Pacers are not willing to do so here with the top pick in the second round, but I think more teams might be willing to, given that second round is just a dart throw, and the more dart throws you get, the better. Caden Starling from Oregon, really surprised he fell to the second round, one of the best finishing guards in this draft, 51% from the field, and he's Antoine Salice's twin. They literally look exactly the same. Tristan McGrath from Australia goes to the Hawks. Anthony Ramsey out of Gonzaga goes to the Jazz. We're going to offer this same trade to Dallas. We'll even add a $1 million trade exception, and the deal goes through. So the Golden State Warriors will make a pick tonight, and we are on the clock. So who are we trading up for? There's a handful of intriguing players left at just about every position. What's the strategy here for Golden State? Max Stacy from Florida, freak athlete, great defensive prospect. Osborne Outeridge, we had him in for a pre-draft workout. Elijah Jackson at one point was supposed to go in the lottery. Chris Gentry, solid traditional big. Shaquem Barker, good international prospect. And Kenya Mbongo, really high ceiling, but is probably about 4 years away. Miles Ogbonna, we talked about him with Maine's miracle run to the Final Four. So with the 36th pick in the 2027 NBA Draft, the Golden State Warriors select Osborne Outeridge from the University of Kansas. Rock chalk. I couldn't help myself. Osborne Outeridge is a guy who has a really high ceiling, and I believe should have gone in the first round. Now, his development has a long ways to go. Not a great scorer. The tools are there to be a good defender, but I don't think he's there yet. We're drafting a high recruit, great athlete who could be a great player. He was supposed to have a great freshman year at Kansas and did not. 10.5 points per game, 6.8 rebounds, but the shooting percentages are pitiful. 39% from the field and 23% from deep. As someone who is 6'10", that's pretty unacceptable. I think he's got good feel for the game as a playmaker, averaged over 2 assists per night. He's a very versatile defender. He can guard just about every position. That doesn't mean he guards every position well. He's not a good defender yet, but he's versatile and can guard the 1 through the 5. He was a dominant high school player at IMG Academy, and Kansas scouts became familiar with him when they were on a recruiting trip to watch a football player, offensive tackle Reggie Chanel, who did later commit to the University of Kansas. Here he is against Montverde. Number 33 there, that's Jaden Carter, who was drafted in the lottery earlier today by the Cavs. And in this matchup, Outeridge dominated. He finished with 31 points, and Jaden Carter had 5. IMG wound up winning that game by 30. So I'm willing to look past the inconsistencies at the college level because Outeridge has so much upside. He's displayed it at the high school level. He's displayed it at the AAU level. And the flashes were there at the University of Kansas. It's just a matter of consistency. We did not make another move into the second round, signaling the conclusion of this year's draft. Certainly a fun one with some big moves, including Joel Embiid to the Nets, LaMelo Ball to the Trailblazers, and a shocker at number 1, Samuel Queen, going with the top spot to the Utah Jazz, who also land Norwood Nobles at number 3. As for us, we don't make any big trades. We lose Onyeka Okongwu in the expansion draft, and we move up in the second round for Osborne Outeridge, a 72 overall. Unfortunately, there were some higher-rated players after him, including from Florida, the kid Max Stacy, who was the next guy on my board. But I believe that Outeridge has the highest ceiling of any player who was left on the board at the time that we made the selection. I don't think he's going to be able to contribute for us in the rotation next year, and maybe not even the year after. But we're playing the long game with him, and I think he could be a very, very good player. Highlighting some of the other notable drafts, the Wizards ended up with 7 second-rounders and 8 players overall. Goddamn, that is a lot. Some teams who I thought made out well included the Clippers. I think Dallas Carter is going to be a stud at number 4 overall. And the Jackson Ryan, I think it's only a matter of time until he really figures it out. Once he becomes a good defender, I think he's going to be a great player. I think the Atlanta Hawks have a very bright future. I believe they will be a playoff team next year. The Hornets have a great young core, trading away LaMelo Ball, adding Scoot Henderson, and 5 new first-round rookies. A surprising pick from the Huskies with Cambridge, a very surprising pick with Samuel Queen to the Jazz. But again, I don't really think it's a bad pick. I don't think Queen is that much worse than the alternative of picking Jabari Ogabari. The Pelicans ended up with 3 first-rounders. They will continue to have a busy offseason with Zion Williamson presumably out the door. I thought the Sonics made a nice pick with Desante Crawford. He is going to average a lot of points as a rookie. The Thunder with no first-rounders. They trade both of them for Denny Avdia. The Blazers, probably the biggest winners of the day. They got LaMelo Ball on their team. And that brings us back to us and sends us into a pivotal free agency with both Nikola Jokic and Giannis Antetokounmpo expected to decline their player options. I'm not going to hide it. I plan on giving both of those guys an offer, even though they are a little bit older and starting to regress. It'll be interesting to see if either of them accept. Maybe we look to go to the trade market for Bam, Ja, or Zion, or maybe we stand pat. I'm perfectly comfortable going into next year, adding a couple role players and running it with this group. Hope everyone enjoyed. Let me know what you think we should do down below in free agency in the comments. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out.